Hello, hello, hello. How are we today? It's good to see you all, as always. It's always such a joy on days when I can hop on and read and hang out with y'all. It's y'all. I do not say y'all on a normal basis. It just came out. I couldn't stop it. But yes, I hope you're all having a great day. The weather is like really weird today. It was really hot. I mean, really hot. It was in like the low 70s. And then it wasn't. And now it's like in the like high 50s, low 60s, and it's not even nighttime, and I don't understand. But today I went to Dunkin' Donuts for a little treat, and they have these like fancy refreshers, and I've never gotten them before. I usually get like a coffee or decaf coffee depending on like what time of day it is. But I got a refresher today. I got a raspberry watermelon refresher and it was a delight. I'm not gonna lie to you, it was a delight. I I don't know if there's caffeine in it. I know that there's sugar in it. There's a lot well, at least it tastes like there's a lot of sugar in it. But it was delicious. It was delightful. There's another one, mango pineapple, and I feel like that one would be like really good on like a super super hot day. So I think I'm gonna hold off on that one and wait until like August when it's like unbearably hot. But yeah, that's my story. That's all I got today. All right, reading updates. I finished my murder. I think I talked about that on Tuesday. Hello, Nomad. So good to see you. Hi, hi. I finished My Murder by Katie Williams. I think I mentioned it on Tuesday or whenever it was last time, and I really liked it. I super enjoyed it. It's a really good mix of science fiction and like thriller mystery-esque. It's about this woman named Lou, and she is brought back to life after being brutally murdered. She is the fifth victim of a serial killer, and her and the rest of the victims have all been back to life. They've been cloned, and it's about them trying to reacclimate back into society. And yeah, it's really good. There's some really good commentary on it. This Lou is a mother. She is a wife. She's a daughter. Her dad is still alive, and it's just like it's really good. And her job is like VR consoling people. So people set up appointments and they wear skins to be in like different looks. So it's like anonymous, and they're in like different settings depending on what the person chooses, and they just like it's like therapy, like almost like hug therapy, I guess. But it's really interesting, and like the science fiction is definitely not the like super focus. It's just thrown in every once in a while, if that makes sense. Like it's just so embedded in the story that it's just there and accepted. It's not like super weird things that need to be like overly explained or anything like that. Yeah, science fiction and mystery is your jam. I love both of those. They're just so good. And the combination, when done right, is just perfection. So, yes, I finished that. And I will be starting Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmis. This is going back to the like challenge that I'm doing of reading top readers' choices for different categories. So this one was the top readers' choice for 2022 for a debut author. So I'm really excited. I don't know anything of what it's about, but I saw that it was going to be made into a movie, a show, something, and that I don't know. Does that excite me? I don't know. I mean, I guess so. I guess it means that like enough people like it, or enough people think that like it translate it translates well to, you know, that medium. So we'll see. But yeah, like I'm not gonna read the back. I'm just gonna go. I'm just gonna dive right in. And of course, I got the large type version because that's who I am as a person. Is a large type person. Um, and I think that's it. I have one more volume of Akira to read, and it is the final one, and I'm so excited. Yeah, just dive in with no regrets. Exactly. Exactly. The amount of books that I have read without knowing beforehand what it is, I can't even tell you. It is far too many. I can't I can't tell you, even if I wanted to, which of course I want to, but like unfathomable. Oh my gosh. Okay. But today we are reading Don Quixote. Look, look. I I don't know what I'm gonna do with myself when we finish this. I just don't know. We have 79 pages to go. That's so wild. That's so wild to me. And like, which seems like a lot. Like if you're used to like, I don't know, like 300-page books, something like that, but like 940 pages. 79 pages is nothing. Is nothing. So yeah, almost done. Which is so wild to say it's 79 pages. But yeah, we're almost done. So yeah, we're starting with chapter 61 today. And let's see if my little pea brain can remember what happened last time. This is like the hardest part of, besides mispronouncing literally every name and every place, the hardest part is remembering what happened last. Your reading consists of sports news. I love that for you. That that is definitely reading. That counts. And you're here too. That counts. Audiobooks or auditory reading, auditory listening, I don't know, totally counts as reading. Okay, so let's see if I can remember. Okay, I'm seeing names that I don't remember. Okay, let's see, let's see. Oh, yes. Okay, so Don Quixote was going to fight the person who is supposed to marry Doña Rodriguez's daughter. And he said that he was going to marry her. They had relations. And then he like went back on his word. So Don Quixote was going to fight this person. And if Don Quixote won, then he would have to marry. And if he lost, then he wouldn't marry, obviously. Um, and so the Duke and the Duchess have their little mitts in this plan, and they make their footman, Tosilos, like, like get in the way. So he stabs the person that he is supposed to be fighting, that Don Quixote is supposed to be fighting, and then like puts on like the knight garb, I guess, and goes in the stead of that person. And he's supposed to, you know, win. I think he's supposed to win, but not kill Don Quixote. Oh no, I think he's supposed to run away. I don't really remember. Something is supposed to happen, but it doesn't happen because he takes a look and he sees Doña Rodriguez's daughter and is like, this is the most beautiful woman in my life. I can't fight. I need to marry this person. And there's like all of this like weirdness because like he is not who she's supposed to marry. There's throwing around like he's enchanted, you know, like because of course he's enchanted to look like somebody else. And the daughter is like, you know what, this guy actually wants to marry me, so I would rather be with somebody who wants to marry me instead of somebody who doesn't. So good for her. I'm glad. And then we leave and we run into, oh yes. So they're back on their way to are they going to Barcelona? No. I don't remember where they're going. They end up going to Barcelona, but on their way, Don Quixote and Sancho have a fight because, of course, they do. And Sancho they're in like a wooded area, and they come across all of these like hanging bodies, and they're all banditos who have been captured and sentenced to death. And then a group of banditos arrive, and then this other person comes in. This all sounds very crazy. I'm realizing that it sounds like I'm like having a fever dream as I'm recounting the things that happened just one reading ago. But this other person comes in, and she is really distraught because she's supposed to marry somebody and found out that that person has claimed they are going to marry somebody else. And so she stabs him, shoots him, she does a bunch of things to like get revenge because she's so mad. And it turns out that this person didn't actually say that they were going to marry somebody else. It was a plot for her to become jealous and take revenge, because of course it is. um and I think that's everything. Don Quixote becomes friends with the leader of the bandits here, and the bandit sends word ahead of him to Barcelona to like welcome him, so that there are people who will be able to be there and like guide him, I guess. And I think I've said this like 40 times, but I think that's where we left off. So, of course, if we come across anything that like I forgot to mention, I'll stop and I'll mention it. But let's go ahead and do this. Chapter 61. Here we go. Regarding what befell Don Quixote when he entered Barcelona, along with other matters that have more truth in them than wit. No, God, this book is so wild. It's so good. And also extremely long, but very good. Don Quixote spent 3 days and 3 nights with Roque, and if it had been 300 years, there would have been no lack of things to observe and marvel at in the way he lived. They awoke here and ate there. At times they fled, not knowing from whom, and at other times they waited, not knowing for whom. They slept on their feet, interrupting their slumber and moving from one place to another. It was always a matter of posting spies, listening to scouts, blowing on the locks of their harquebuses, although they had few of those since everyone used flintlocks. Roque spent the nights away from his men, in locations and places they did not know, because the many edicts issued by the Viceroy of Barcelona against his life made him uneasy and apprehensive, and he did not dare trust anyone, fearing his own men might kill him or turn him in to the authorities, a life, certainly, that was disquieting and troublesome. And we have our first footnote already today, and it is right after many edicts issued by the Viceroy of Barcelona, and it says, Niarros and the Cadell. Oh, wait, no, wrong footnote, excuse me. And it says, more accurately, the Viceroy of Catalunya. Finally, using abandoned roads, shortcuts, and hidden paths, Roque, Don Quixote, Sancho, and another 6 squires set out for Barcelona. They reached the shore on the night of St. John's Eve, and Roque embraced Don Quixote and Sancho, presented the squire with 10 escudos he had promised, but had not given him, and took his leave with 1,000 services offered on both sides. Roque returned to the countryside, and Don Quixote remained mounted on his horse, waiting for daybreak, and it was not long before the pale face of dawn began to appear along the balconies of the east, bringing joy to the grass and flowers rather than to the ear, for at that very moment ears were made joyous by the sound of many flageolets, and timbrels, the jingling of bells, the make way, stand aside, of runners who, apparently, were coming from the city. Dawn made way for the sun, whose face, larger than a shield, gradually rose from below the horizon. Don Quixote and Sancho turned their eyes in all directions. They saw the ocean, which they had not seen before. It seemed broad and vast to them, much larger than the lakes of Ruidera, that they had seen in La Mancha. They saw the galleys near the shore, and when the canopies were raised, their pennants and streamers were revealed, fluttering in the wind and kissing and sweeping the water. From the galleys came the sound of bugles, trumpets, flageolets, and the breeze carried the sweetly martial tones near and far. The ships began to move, performing a mock skirmish on the quiet waters, and, corresponding in almost the same fashion, an infinite number of knights on beautiful horses and in splendid livery rode out from the city. The soldiers on the galleys fired countless pieces of artillery, and the heavy artillery shook the air with a fearsome clamor, and was answered by the midship cannon on the galleys. The joyful sea, the jocund land, the transparent air, perhaps clouded only by the smoke from the artillery, seemed to create and engender a sudden delight in all the people. Sancho could not imagine how those shapes moving on the ocean could have so many feet. And then the knights in livery, with shouts, lilies, and cries, came galloping up to a stupefied and astounded Don Quixote, and one of them, who had been advised by Roque, called in a loud voice to Don Quixote, "May the model, beacon, light, and pole star of all knight-errantry be welcome to our city, world without end. Welcome, I say, to the valorous Don Quixote of La Mancha, not the false, the fictitious, the apocryphal one we have seen recently in false histories, but the true, the legitimate, the faithful one described for us by Cid Hamete Benengeli, the flower of all historians." Don Quixote did not say a word, and the knights did not wait for him to respond, but wheeling and turning with all their entourage behind them, they began to move in caracoles around Don Quixote, who turned to Sancho and said, "These men know us very well. I would wager that they have read our history, and even the one recently published by the Aragonese." The knight who had spoken to Don Quixote returned, saying, "Your Grace, Señor Don Quixote, come with us, for we are all your servants and great friends of Roque Guinart's." To which Don Quixote responded, "If courtesy engenders courtesy, yours, Señor Knight, is the daughter or close relative of the great Roques. Take me wherever you wish, for I shall have no will but yours. Above all, if you desire to employ mine in your service." The knight responded with words no less courtly, and the others encircled Don Quixote, and to the sound of flageolets and timbrels they rode with him to the city, and as they entered it, there were the evil one, who ordains all wickedness, and boys, who are more evil than the evil one. Two of them, who are particularly mischievous and imprudent, made their way through all the people, and one lifted the grey's tail, and the other lifted Rocinante's, and there they placed and inserted branches of firs in each one. And there is a note here after firs. It's spelled F-U-R-Z-E. It says, "A prickly evergreen shrub native to European wastelands." Rude. Rocinante and the Grey did nothing to deserve this. The poor animals felt their new spurs, and when they pressed down their tails, they increased their discomfort to such an extent that they reared and bucked 1,000 times and threw their riders to the ground. Don Quixote, enraged and affronted, hurried to remove the plumage from the tail of his nag, and Sancho did the same for his gray. Those who were escorting Don Quixote wanted to punish the insolence of the boys, but it was not possible, because they hid among the 1,000 others who were following them. Don Quixote and Sancho remounted, accompanied by the same acclamation and music. They arrived at the house of their guide, which was large and imposing, as befitted a wealthy gentleman, and there we shall leave them for now, since this is the wish of Cid Hamate. And that is the end of chapter 61. That was a super short chapter. Okay, so what did we do this time? Well, they're traveling to Barcelona with Roque Guinart, who is the leader of the, it was so quick, yeah, who is the leader of the bandits, and yeah, they're just talking about like how weird he is and like he's an outcast and an outlaw, and so he has to be careful that way. And then they get to Barcelona, and these boys are just like playing tricks because boys are, I mean, I don't want to say boys will be boys, but like, yeah. And so they put these like prickly little brambles underneath the tails of Rocinante and the Grey, and of course it's uncomfortable, and of course they're gonna try and fight back, but they can't escape it. So they like end up bucking Don Quixote and Sancho off of them, and they get to the house of their guide, and that's about it. That's about all that happened. Hey Duddy, how's it going? Good to see you as always. Okay. Chapter 62. You have missed nothing from chapter 61, Duddy. It was like 2 pages, and they arrived at Barcelona. That's all you need to know. That's the big thing. Chapter 62, which relates the adventures of the Enchanted Head, as well as other foolishness that must be recounted. Don Antonio Moreno was the name of Don Quixote's hosts, a wealthy and discerning gentleman, very fond of seemly and benign amusements, who, finding Don Quixote in his house, sought ways to make his madness public without harming him. For jests that cause pain are not jests, and entertainments are not worthwhile if they injure another. Okay, and I feel like this is where the Duke and Duchess differ, because the tricks that they played on Don Quixote and Sancho did cause harm. They just did. Oh yeah, of course. Enjoy your cat nap. Lurk away. Do what you gotta do. Um, yeah, like the tricks that the Duke and Duchess played on our buddies caused harm. And like that's not cool, you know? So we'll see what Antonio Moreno has in store, and if it actually is just like, fun teasing, or if it is harmful. We'll find out. The first thing he did was to have Don Quixote remove his armor and to take him, dressed in the tight-fitting chamois clothing we have already described and depicted, out to a balcony that overlooked one of the principal streets in the city, in plain view of passers-by and boys, who looked at him as if he were a monkey. Once again, the horsemen in livery galloped before him as if they had put on finery for him, alone and not to celebrate the feast day. And Sancho was extremely happy, because it seemed to him that without knowing how or why, he found himself at another Camacho's wedding, another house like Don Diego de Miranda's, another castle like the Duke's. Some of Don Antonio's friends ate dinner with him that day, and they all honored Don Quixote and treated him as if he were a knight-errant, which so filled him with pride and vanity that he could hardly contain his joy. Sancho made so many comical remarks that all the servants in the house and everyone else who heard him hung on his every word. When they were at the table, Don Antonio said to Sancho, "We have heard, good Sancho, that you are so fond of white morsels and of risoles, that if any are left over, you keep them in your shirt for the next day." And there are two notes in that sentence. The first one is after white morsels, and it says, "Manjar blanco, a dish made of chicken breasts, white, a dish made of chicken breasts, rice flour, milk, and sugar." And then the second note is after you keep them in your shirt for the next day, and it says, "In Avellanenda's book, Sancho is said to be extremely fond of risoles." "No, señor, that isn't so," responded Sancho, "because I'm more clean than gluttonous, and my master, Don Quixote, here before you, knows very well that we both can go a week on a handful of acorns or nuts. It's true that if somebody happens to give me a calf, I come running with the rope. I mean, I eat what I'm given and take advantage of the opportunities I find, and anybody who says I'm dirty and stuff myself when I eat doesn't know what he's talking about. And I'd say it another way if I didn't see so many honorable beards at this table." "There is no doubt," said Don Quixote, "that the moderation and cleanliness with which Sancho eats could be written and engraved on bronze plates and remembered forever in times to come. True, when he is hungry he seems something of a glutton because he eats quickly and chews voraciously, but he is always perfectly clean, and during the time he was governor he learned to eat so fastidiously that he ate grapes and even the seeds of a pomegranate with a fork." "What?" said Don Antonio. "Sancho was a governor?" "Yeah," responded Sancho, "of an insula called Barataria. For 10 days I governed it as nicely as you please, and during that time I lost my peace of mind and learned to look down on all the governorships in the world. I left there in a hurry, and fell into a pit where I thought I was going to die, and by a miracle I came out of it alive." Don Quixote recounted in detail the story of Sancho's governorship, affording great pleasure to those who heard him. When the table had been cleared, Don Antonio took Don Quixote by the hand and led him to a side room where the only furnishing was a table, apparently of jasper, on a base of the same material, and on it there was a head made in the fashion of the busts of Roman emperors, which seemed to be of bronze. Don Antonio walked with Don Quixote around the chamber, circling the table many times, and then he said, "Now that I am certain, Don Quixote, that no one is listening, and no one can hear us, and the door is closed, I want to tell your grace about the strangest adventures, or I should say marvels, that anyone could imagine, on the condition that whatever I tell your grace must be buried in the deepest recess of secrecy." "I swear to that," responded Don Quixote, "and I shall even place a stone over it for greater security, because I want your grace to know, Señor Don Antonio," for by now Don Quixote knew his name, "that you are speaking to one who has ears to hear, but no tongue with which to speak. Therefore, your grace can safely transfer what is in your heart to mine, and be certain that it can be thrown into the abyss of silence." "Wadsworth, hello, good to see you, good to see you." How many pages we have left? Okay, let's see. Oh my gosh, you're gonna make me math. We are on page 866, and there's 940 pages. So we have 74 pages. Yeah, 74 pages. I was like, did I do that correctly? Yeah, 74, amazing. "Trusting in that promise," responded Don Antonio, "I am going to astound your grace with what you will see and hear, and alleviate some of the sorrow I feel at not having anyone to whom I can communicate my secrets. for they are not the sort that can be entrusted to everyone. Exactly, 74. Solamente 64 páginas. Don Quixote was perplexed, wanting to see where so many precautions would lead. At this point, Don Antonio took his hand and passed it over the bronze head and around the entire table, and along the jasper base on which it rested, and then he said, "This head, Señor Don Quixote, has been fabricated and made by one of the greatest enchanters and wizards the world has ever seen, a Pole, I believe, and disciple of the famous Escotillo, and whom so many marvels are told. He was here in my house, and for 1,000 escudos which I paid him, he fashioned this head, which has the property and virtue of responding to any question spoken into its ear." And there is a note after Escotillo, and it says, "Martin de Ricoeur is certain the reference is to Michael Scott." Excuse me, Michael Scott of Dunder Mifflin? No. Who studied at Oxford, Bologna, Paris, and eventually Toledo, where he learned Arabic, the language from which he translated, or supervised the translation of, many of Aristotle's writings into Latin. Escotillo is the diminutive of Escoto, his name in Spanish. For a variety of reasons, including his interests in astrology, alchemy, and the occult sciences, he was widely known as the magician and soothsayer. World's best boss, Michael Scott. Exactly. There's only one Michael Scott ever in the world, so it must be that one. He determined the bearings, painted the characters, observed the stars, looked at the degrees, and finally completed this with all the perfection that we shall see tomorrow, because the head is mute on Fridays, and since today is Friday, we shall have to wait until tomorrow. During this time, your grace will be able to prepare the questions you wish to ask, though through experience I know it is truthful in all its responses." Don Quixote, astonished at the head's virtue and property, was inclined not to believe Don Antonio, but seeing how little time he would have to wait to experience it for himself, he said nothing except to thank him for having disclosed so great a secret to him. They left the room. Don Antonio locked the door with a key, and they went to the large room where the other gentlemen were waiting. During this time, Sancho had recounted to them many of the adventures and incidents that had befallen his master. That afternoon, the gentleman took Don Quixote out riding, dressed not in armor, but in ordinary street clothes, a long, caped cassock of tawny woolen cloth that would have made ice itself perspire at that time of year. The servants were told to keep Sancho entertained and not to let him leave the house. Don Quixote did not ride Rocinante, but was mounted on a large, smooth-gaited mule with very fine trappings. They gave him the cassock to put on, and on the back, which he did not see, they had attached a sign that read in large letters, "This is Don Quixote of La Mancha." I was really hoping that the sign would say "kick me." That's what I was preparing to say. As they were starting out, the announcement caught the eye of all the passers-by, and since they read, "This is Don Quixote of La Mancha," Don Quixote was surprised to see that everybody who looked at him recognized him and knew his name. Turning to Don Antonio, who was at his side, he said, "Great is the prerogative contained within knight-errantry, rendering the man who professes it well known and famous everywhere on earth. For your grace will observe, Señor Don Antonio, that even the boys in this city who have never seen me before know who I am." "That is so, Señor Don Quixote," responded Don Antonio, "for just a fire cannot be hidden and enclosed. Virtue cannot fail to be recognized, and that which is achieved through the profession of arms exceeds and outshines all others." It also happened that while Don Quixote was receiving the acclaim that has been mentioned, a Castilian who read the sign on his back raised his voice and said, "The devil take Don Quixote of La Mancha. How did you get this far without dying from all the beatings you've received? You're a madman, and if you were a madman in private behind the doors of your madness, it wouldn't be so bad. But you have the attribute of turning everyone who deals with you or talks to you into madmen and fools, too. If you don't believe me, just look at these gentlemen who are accompanying you. Return, fool, to your house, and look after your estate, your wife, and your children, and stop this nonsense that is rotting your brain and ruining your mind." "Brother," said Don Antonio, "go on your way, and don't give advice to people who don't ask for it. Señor Don Quixote of La Mancha is a very prudent man, and we who accompany him are not dolts. Virtue must be honored wherever it is found. Now go, and bad luck to you, and stop minding other people's business." I didn't realize that you could just wish people bad luck. Like, of course, like, "Oh, good luck." But I don't think I've ever heard anybody say, "Bad luck." It's interesting, but of course that makes sense. "By God, your grace is right," responded the Castilian. "Giving this good man advice is like kicking at thorns. Even so, it makes me very sad that the good sense everyone says this fool has in other matters should run out into the gutter of this knight-errantry. As for the bad luck your grace mentioned, let it be for me and all my descendants, if after today, though I live longer than Methuselah, I ever give advice to anybody again, even if he asks for it." You say it, but not out loud. Amazing. I guess, yeah, I guess you're right. I do have those thoughts, but I've never been like, "Bad luck." The dispenser of advice left, and the excursion continued. But there was such a crush of boys and other people reading the sign that that Don Antonio had to remove it, under the pretext that he was removing something else. "Crocodilia, hello, good to see you." Night fell. They returned home, where there was a soiree of ladies, for Don Antonio's wife, who was well-born, good-natured, beautiful, and clever, had invited her friends to come and honor their guest and enjoy his incomparable madness. A number of ladies attended, a splendid supper was served, and the soiree began when it was almost 10 o'clock. Among the ladies there were two with mischievous and jocund tastes, and although very respectable, they were somewhat brash in devising but harmless jokes. There we go. It's like, that doesn't make any sense, but it does. They were so insistent on Don Quixote's dancing with them that they exhausted him, not only in body, but in spirit. Don Quixote was a remarkable sight, tall, scrawny, lean, sallow, wearing tight-fitting clothes, awkward, and not at all graceful. The young ladies entreated him on the sly, and he, also on the sly, rejected them, but finding himself hard-pressed by their entreaties, he raised his voice, saying, "Fugite partes adversae, leave me in peace, unwelcome thoughts. Señoras, control your desires, for she who is queen of mine, the peerless Dulcinea of Toboso, does not allow any but her own to subdue and defeat me." And there is a note after "Fugite partes adversae," and it says, "Flee, enemies." a formula used in exorcisms. Amazing, amazing, amazing. You ready to go to sleep? Yes, I understand that. And having said this, he sat down on the floor in the middle of the room, exhausted and wearied by so much dancing. Don Antonio ordered him picked up and carried to his bed, and the first to lay hands on him was Sancho, saying, "Unlucky for you, Señor Master, when you started dancing. Do you think all brave men are dancers and all knights-errants spin around? I say that if you think so, you're mistaken. There are men who'd dare to kill a giant before they'd prance around. If you'd been stamping your heels and toes, I'd have taken your place because I'm a wonderful stamper. But as for dancing, I don't know anything about it." With these and other words like them, Sancho gave those at the soiree reason for laughter, and he put his master to bed, wrapping him in blankets so that he would sweat out the chill he felt because of his dancing. The next day, Don Antonio thought it would be a good idea to try the enchanted head, and with Don Quixote, Sancho, and another two friends, along with the two ladies who had exhausted Don Quixote with their dancing, for they had spent the night with Don Antonio's wife, he went into the room with the head and closed the door. He told them about his properties, charged them to keep them secret, and said that this was the first day the virtue of the enchanted head would be tested. Except for Don Antonio's two friends, no one else knew the secret of the enchantment, and if Don Antonio had not revealed it to them earlier, they too would have been as astounded as the others. It was so carefully planned and designed. The first to go up to the ear was the head of Don Antonio himself, and he said in a quiet voice, but not so quiet that the others could not hear him, "Tell me, head, by the virtue contained within you, what are my thoughts now?" And the head responded, not moving its lips, in a clear and distinct voice so that it was heard by everyone, "I do not consider thoughts." When they heard this, everyone was stunned, especially since nowhere in the room or near the table was there a human being who could have responded. "How many people are here?" Don Antonio asked, and in the same tone came the response, "There are you and your wife, two friends of yours and two of hers, a famous knight called Don Quixote of La Mancha, and his squire, whose name is Sancho Panza." At this, everyone certainly was stunned. At this, everyone's hair certainly stood on end from sheer terror. And Don Antonio, moving away from the head, said, "This is enough for me to know I was not deceived by the one who sold you to me, O wise head, speaking head, responding head, admirable head. Let others come up and ask whatever they wish." And since women are ordinarily very hasty and fond of knowing, the first to approach was one of the two friends of Don Antonio's wife, and the question she asked was, "Tell me, head, what should I do to be very beautiful?" And the response to her was, "Be very virtuous." "I won't ask you anything else," said the questioner. Then her friend approached and said, "I'd like to know, head, if my husband really loves me." And the answer was, "Think about what he does for you, and then you will know." The married woman moved away, saying, "This answer didn't need a question, because it is in fact that a man's actions declare his feelings." Then one of Don Antonio's two friends came up and said, "Who am I?" And the response was, "You know who you are." "I'm not asking that," responded the gentleman. "I'm asking you to tell me if you know me." "Yes, I know you," was the response. "You are Don Pedro Noris." "I don't want to know more, for this is enough for me to realize, O head, that you know everything." When he moved away, the other friend approached and said, "Tell me, head, what does my son and heir desire?" "I have already said," came the response, "that I do not consider desires, but despite this, I can tell you that what your son desires is to bury you." "That's right," said the gentleman. "What I see with my eyes I can touch with my fingers." And he asked nothing more. Don Antonio's wife came up and said, "Head, I don't know what to ask you. I only wanted to know if I'll enjoy many more years with my good husband." And the response was, "You will, because his health and temperate living promise many years of life, which many people tend to cut short by their intemperance." Then Don Quixote approached and said, "Tell me, you who respond, was my account of what happened to me in the cave of Montesinos the truth or a dream? Will the lashes of my squire Sancho be completed? Will the disenchantment of Dulcinea take place?" "As for the cave," was the response, "there is much to say, for it has something of both. Sancho's lashes will go slowly, and the disenchantment of Dulcinea will be duly effected." "I do not wish to know more," said Don Quixote, "for when I see Dulcinea disenchanted, I shall think that all the good fortune I could wish for has all come true." The final questioner was Sancho, and what he asked was, "By chance, head, will I have another governorship? Will I ever escape a squire's poverty? Will I see my wife and children again?" The response was, "You will govern in your house, and if you return there, you will see your wife and children, and when you stop serving, you will stop being a squire." "By God, that's good," said Sancho Panza. "I could have told myself that. The prophet, old chestnut, couldn't have said more." "Animal," said Don Quixote, "what response do you want? Is it not enough that this head has given answers that correspond to what is asked of it?" "Yes, it's enough," responded Sancho, "but I'd like it to declare more and tell me more." With this, the questions and answers came to an end, but not the amazement felt by everyone except the two friends of Don Antonio, who were privy to the secret. Cid Hamete Benengeli wished to explain the matter immediately in order to curb the astonishment of those who might think that something magical and extraordinary mystery was contained in the head, and so he tells us that Don Antonio Moreno, in imitation of another head he had seen in Madrid, which had been fabricated by an engraver, had this one made in his own house for his own entertainment and to astound the ignorant. It was constructed in this fashion. The tabletop was of wood painted and varnished to look like jasper, and the base on which it rested was made of the same material, with 4 eagles' talons projecting from it for greater stability. The head, which resembled a carved portrait bust of a Roman emperor cast in bronze, was completely hollow, as was the tabletop, into which it fit so perfectly that there was no sign of their joining. The base of the table was also hollow, corresponding to the throat and chest of the head, and all this connected to another chamber beneath the room where the head was located. Through the entire hollow of the base, tabletop, throat, and chest of the portrait bust ran a tube of tin plate that was very precisely fitted and could not be seen by anyone. Posted in the corresponding chamber below was a man who would respond, his mouth up against the tube, so that, if the tube were an ear trumpet, one voice would travel down and the other would travel up in clear, well-articulated words, and in this way it was not possible to discover the deception. Don Antonio's nephew, an astute and clever student, was the responder. having been told by his uncle, who would come into the room with him to question the head that day. It was easy for him to respond quickly and accurately to the first question. He responded to the others by conjecture and, since he was clever, with cleverness. Cid Hamate goes on to say that this marvelous device lasted 10 or 12 days. But word spread throughout the city that Don Antonio had an enchanted head in his house that would answer every question asked of it, and fearing that the rumors would reach the ears of the alert guardians of our faith, he informed the inquisitors of the matter, and was ordered to dismantle it and not to use it in the future, lest it cause turmoil among the ignorant common people. But in the opinion of Don Quixote and Sancho Panza, the head was still enchanted and responsive, more to the satisfaction of Don Quixote than Sancho. The gentlemen of the city, in order to please Don Antonio and to entertain Don Quixote and give him the opportunity to reveal his madness, arranged to hold a tilting of the ring in 6 days' time, but it did not take place because of an accident that will be recounted later. Don Quixote wanted to go out into the city in a simple manner, and on foot, fearing that if he went on horseback, he would be pursued by boys, and so he and Sancho, and 2 servants offered to him by Don Antonio, went out for a walk. Oh, thank you so much, Crocodilia. Thank you, thank you. As he was going down a street, Don Quixote happened to look up, and over a door he saw written in very large letters, "Books printed here," which made him very happy because he never visited a print shop, and he wished to know what it was like. And there is a note after "Books printed here," and it says, according to Martin de Ricoeur, Cervantes is describing the printing house of Sebastian de Cormeas on Calle del Cal, which brought out a good number of the classic works of the Spanish Golden Age. He went in with his entourage, and he saw them printing in one place, correcting in another, typesetting here, revising there. In short, all the procedures that can be seen in large printing houses. Don Quixote approached one section and asked what they were doing there. The workman told them. He marveled and moved on. He went up to another place. Oops. Oh my gosh, I lost my spot. He went in with his entourage, yes. Here we go. He went up to another workman and asked him what he was doing. He responded, "Signor, this gentleman here," and he pointed to a rather serious man of fine appearance and figure, "has translated a Tuscan book into our Castilian language, and I'm setting this type so that it can be printed." "What is the title of the book?" asked Don Quixote, to which the translator replied, "Signor, in Tuscan the book is called Le Bagatelle." "And what does Le Bagatelle mean in our Castilian?" asked Don Quixote. And there is a note after the first time. It says Le Bagatelle, and it says, Martin de Ricoeur points out that the book has not been identified, and that in Italian the title would be Le Bagatelle, not La Bagatelle. There has been speculation that this might be an anagram for Legalité by Giovanni della Casa, which was translated into Spanish in 1585 by Dr. Domingo Becerra, who was a prisoner in Algiers at the same time as Cervantes. Le Bagatelle, said the translator, would be like our saying, the playthings, and though this book has a humble name, it contains and includes very good and substantive things. "I," said Don Quixote, "know a little Tuscan, and take pride in singing some stanzas by Ariosto. But tell me, señor, And I do not say this because I wish to test your Grace's abilities, but simply out of curiosity. In your translating, has your Grace ever come across the word pignata? Many times. Yes, responded the translator. And how does your Grace translate it into Castilian? Asked Don Quixote. How would I translate it? Replied the translator, except by saying stew pot. By God, said Don Quixote, how well your Grace knows the Tuscan language. I would wager a good sum that where the Tuscan says piace, your Grace says please in Castilian, and where it says pew, you say more, and su you render as above, and you as below. Yes, I do, certainly, said the translator, because those are the corresponding words. And I shall be so bold as to swear, said Don Quixote, that your Grace is not well known in the world, which is always unwilling to reward rare talents and praiseworthy efforts. What abilities are lost there, what talents ignored, what virtues scorned. But despite all this, it seems to me that translating from one language to another, unless it is from Greek and Latin, the queens of all languages, is like looking at Flemish tapestries from the wrong side. For although the figures are visible, they are covered by threads that obscure them, and cannot be seen with the smoothness and color of the right side. Translating easy languages does not argue for either talent or eloquence, just as transcribing or copying from one paper to another does not argue for those qualities. And I do not wish to infer from this that the practice of translating is not deserving of praise, because a man might engage in worse things that bring him even less benefit. From this reckoning, I accept two famous translators. One is Dr. Cristobal de Figueroa for his Pastor Fido, and the other is Don Juan de... Oh man, I am gonna say this very wrong. Jaureguilla for his Aminta, where they happily bring into question which is the translation and which the original. And there is a note after Aminta that says Cristobal Suarez de Figueroa's translation of Il Pastor Fido by Battista Guarini was published in Naples in 1602. Juan de Jaureguilla translation of Torquato Tasso's La Minta was published in Rome in 1607. I know, just say it. But tell me, Your Grace, is this book being printed at your expense, or have the rights already been sold to a bookseller? I am printing it at my own expense, responded the translator, and expect to earn at least 1,000 ducados with this first printing, which will consist of 2,000 copies that can easily be sold for 6 reales each. Your Grace is certainly good at calculations, responded Don Quixote, but it seems you do not know how printers collude, or the favors they do for one another. I promise that when you find yourself burdened with 2,000 copies of the book, your body will be so exhausted it will disconcert you, especially if the book is slightly out of the ordinary and not at all risque. And, said the translator, would your Grace prefer that I give it to a bookseller, who will pay me 3 maravedis for the rights and think he's doing me a favor? I don't print my books to achieve fame in the world, because I'm already well known for my work. I want profit. Without it, fame isn't worth a thing. God grant your Grace good fortune, responded Don Quixote. And he moved to another section, where he saw that they were correcting sheets from a book entitled Light of the Soul. And when he saw it, he said, These are the kinds of books, although there are a good number of them, which ought to be printed, because there are countless sinners, and infinite illumination is needed for so many who are unenlightened. And there's a note right after a book entitled Light of the Soul, and it says Luz del Alma, Valladolid, 1554, by the Dominican friar Felipe de Meneses, was heavily influenced by Erasmus. For a time it was widely read and had several printings, though none in Barcelona, and as far as anyone knows. He moved on and saw that they were also correcting another book, and when he asked its title, they responded that it was called The Second Part of the Ingenious Gentleman Don Quixote of La Mancha, written by somebody from Tordesillas. And there is a note right after Tordesillas, and it says, Avellaneda called himself a native of the town of Tordesillas. Apparently, there was no Barcelona edition of the False Quixote in the 17th century. The second printing appeared in Madrid in 1732. I have already heard of this book, said Don Quixote, and by my conscience, the truth is, I thought it had already been burned and turned to ashes for its insolence. But its day of reckoning will come, as it does to every pig, for feigned histories are good and enjoyable, the closer they are to the truth or the appearance of truth, and as for true ones, the truer they are, the better. And there is a note after, reckoning will come as it does to every pig, and it says, the phrase in Spanish is, su San Martín se le llegará como a cada puerco. Having your St. Martin's Day come, is roughly equivalent to paying the piper in English, since St. Martin's Day also refers to the time when animals are slaughtered. Brutal. And having said this, and showing some signs of displeasure, he left the printing house, and that same day Don Antonio arranged for him to be taken to see the galleys along the coast, which made Sancho very happy, because he had never seen any before. Don Antonio informed the Quatralbo that he would be bringing his famous guest, Don Quixote of La Mancha, about whom the Quatralbo and all the residents of the city had heard, to see the galleys that afternoon, and what happened to him on board will be recounted in the following chapter. And there is a note after Quatralbo, and it says, an officer in command of 4 galleys, which totally makes sense because cuatro in Spanish means 4. And that is the end of chapter 62. All right, so this trick that Don Antonio has played, definitely more lighthearted and doesn't actually cause physical harm at all. So he has set up a head, a sculptured head, to say, to like respond, and he's saying that it knows the future and it is a soothsayer and all of these sorts of things. Mario, hello, welcome in. Thank you so much for the follow. And so they like ask it questions, the head answers when really like it's a hollow head and there is somebody like underneath that can hear what they're saying and respond in kind. And then another thing that Don Antonio has done is they're all out walking around the town and observing Barcelona, and Don Antonio puts a sign on the back of Don Quixote that says, I am Don Quixote of La Mancha. And of course, like everybody who has read the book or who has heard of him is just in awe and really excited. And there is somebody who just thinks he's a fool and is calling him out on it. And Don Antonio like shoos him away and is like, how dare you? Like, nobody asked for your advice. Carry on. Um, and then they go into a printing house, and there's a bunch of books that are being translated into different languages, and Don Quixote is talking to a couple of the translators. And that is where we've left off. Yeah. Oh, thank you so much. And yeah, I'm doing pretty good. I hope you are too. Okay. I'm a little thirsty, so I'm gonna have a sip. How are you doing? Dehydrating. Slowly yet surely. All right. Chapter 63. Regarding the evil that befell Sancho Panza on his visit to the galleys, and the remarkable adventure of the beautiful Morisca. Don Quixote meditated at length on the response of the enchanted head, never realizing the deception, and always concluding with the promise, which he regarded as certain, of Dulcinea's disenchantment. He returned to it again and again and rejoiced, believing he would soon see the promise fulfilled. And Sancho, although he had despised being governor, as has already been said, still wished to give orders and be obeyed, for command, even mock command, brings his misfortune with it. Oh, no worries. Of course you can ask me. I'm in the Chicago area. Yeah. In short, that afternoon their host, Don Antonio Morena, and his two friends, along with Don Quixote and Sancho, went to see the galleys. The Quattrabo had been advised of their most welcome visit, since it meant seeing the famous pair, Don Quixote and Sancho. And as soon as they reached the harbor, all the galleys took down their canopies, and flageolets began to sound. Then a skiff covered with rich tapestries and pillows of scarlet velvet was lowered into the water, and as soon as Don Quixote set foot in it, the flagship fired its midship cannon, and the other galleys did the same. And when Don Quixote climbed the starboard ladder, the oarsmen and the entire crew cheered him, as was customary when a distinguished person boarded the galley, repeating, "Hurrah! Hurrah! Hurrah! Hurrah!" 3 times. The Admiral General, which is what we shall call him, for he was a distinguished gentleman from Valencia, gave him his hand, then embraced Don Quixote, saying, "I shall mark this day with a white stone, because it is one of the best I think I shall ever have in my life, for on it I have seen Señor Don Quixote of La Mancha, who demonstrates that all the valor of knight-errantry is epitomized and exemplified in his person." Don Quixote responded with words no less courteous, delighted beyond measure to find himself treated so nobly. They all went to the stern, which was beautifully adorned, and they sat on the side benches. The boatswain passed along the midship gangway and signaled on his whistle for the oarsmen to strip to the waist, which they did instantly. And there is a note right after oarsmen to strip to the waist, and it says, "This meant that they were prepared to row." I definitely would not have gotten that from that phrase. So thank you, footnotes, once again, coming in clutch. Sancho was stunned to see so many people undressed, especially when they saw the canopy lowered so quickly. It seemed to him that all the devils were working there, but this was mere child's play compared to what I shall tell you now. Sancho was sitting on the pole that held the canopy next to the stern rower on the starboard side, who had already received his instructions, and he seized Sancho and lifted him up in his arms while all the oarsmen stood ready, and beginning on the starboard side, the arms of the rowers passed him and tossed him from bench to bench with so much speed that poor Sancho's eyes could no longer see, and he undoubtedly thought the demons were carrying him off, and the oarsmen did not stop until they had returned him along the port side back to the stern. And there is a note right after, next to the stern rower, and it says, "One of the oarsmen who sat with his back to the stern." There you go. The poor man was bruised, breathless, perspiring, and unable to imagine what had happened to him. It is so wild how Sancho somehow always finds himself being tossed around and beaten up in almost every place that they go. Poor Sancho. Pobrecito. Don Quixote, who saw Sancho's wingless flight, asked the Admiral General if there were ceremonies used with those who boarded galleys for the first time, because if they were, he, who had no intention of adhering to them, did not wish to engage in the practice, and he made a vow to God that if anyone attempted to seize him and toss him, he would tear the soul out of his body, and saying this, he stood and grasped his sword. Falcor, hello. So good to see you. Welcome in. At that moment, they raised the canopy, and with an extremely loud noise, they dropped the lateen yard. Sancho thought the sky had come loose from its frame, and was about to fall on his head, and filled with fear, he lowered his head and put it between his legs. Don Quixote was frightened as well, and he trembled and hunched his shoulders, and the color drained from his face. The crew hoisted the yard as quickly and noisily as they had lowered it, and they did it all without a word, as if they had neither voice nor breath. The boatswain signaled that they should weigh anchor, and jumping onto the middle of the gangway with his whip or scourge, he began to flog the backs of the oarsmen, and the ship slowly put out to sea. When Sancho saw the movement of so many red feet, for that is what he thought the oars were, he said to himself, "There are things that really are enchanted, not the ones my master says. What have these unfortunate men done to be whipped in this way, and how does one man, who walks around here whistling, dare to flog so many people? I say this must be hell, or purgatory at least." Don Quixote, who saw how attentively Sancho observed what was going on, said to him, "Ah, Sancho, my friend, how quickly and at how little cost you could, if you wished, strip down to your waist and sit among these gentlemen and conclude this disenchantment of Dulcinea. For surrounded by the misery and suffering of so many, you would not feel your own so much. Moreover, it would be that the wise Merlin would count each of these lashes, since they are administered by an able hand, as 10 of those you must finally give yourself." The Admiral General wanted to ask about the lashes and the disenchantment of Dulcinea, but just then the sailor called out, "Oh my gosh, he said something. Montjuic is signaling that there's an oared vessel along the coast to the west." And there is a note after Montjuic. It is spelled Montjuich. And it says the castle of Montjuic, which overlooks Barcelona. There you go. When he heard this, the Admiral General jumped onto the gangway and said, "Ho, my boys, don't let it get away. The watchtower must be signaling us about a pirate brigantine out of Algiers." The other three galleys approached the flagship to learn their orders. The Admiral General commanded the two of them head out to sea, while he and the other ship sailed close to shore, and in this way the brigantine would not escape. The oarsmen pulled on their oars, propelling the galleys with so much fury that they seemed to fly. When the galleys had Let's start that sentence over. When the galleys heading out to sea had gone about 2 miles, they caught sight of a brigantine that they judged to have about 14 or 15 rowers' benches, which was true. When the brigantine sighted the galleys, it tried to escape, intending and hoping to get away on account of its speed, but things went badly for her, because the flagship was one of the fastest vessels sailing the sea, and as it was overtaking the brigantine, it became clear to her captain that she could not escape, and he wanted the crew to lower their oars and surrender in order not to anger the captain in command of our galleys. But fate, having something else in store, ordained that when the flagship had come so close that those on the brigantine could hear the voices telling them to surrender, 2 drunken Torquis, which is to say, 2 Turks out of the 14 on board the brigantine, fired their muskets and killed 2 soldiers who were on our foredecks. Seeing this, the Admiral General swore not to leave anyone on the other vessel alive, but as he began a furious assault, the brigantine slipped away under the flagship's oars. The galley moved a good distance forward. Those in the brigantine saw that they had escaped, and set sail as the galley was turning, and again, with sails and oars they attempted to flee, but their diligence did not help them as much as their audacity had hurt them, because the flagship overtook them in little more than half a mile, then lowered its oars onto the brigantine, and captured everyone on board alive. Red Talus, hello. So good to see you. Hi. At this point, the other 2 galleys approached, and all 4 of them, with their prize, returned to shore, where an infinite number of people were waiting, impatient to know what they were bringing in. The Admiral General dropped anchor close to land and learned that the viceroy of the city was on shore. He sent the skiff for them, and ordered the lateen yard lowered so that he could immediately hang the pirate captain and the rest of the Turks he had captured, who numbered some 36 persons, all of them valiant, and most of them Turkish musketeers. The Admiral General asked which of them was the captain of the brigantine, and the response came in the Castilian tongue from one of the captives, a Spanish renegade, as it turned out. Senor, this man whom you see here is our captain. And he pointed to one of the handsomest and most gallant boys the human mind could ever imagine. His age seemed less than 20. The General Admiral asked him, "Tell me, ill-advised dog, who urged you to kill my soldiers when you saw it was impossible to escape? Is that the respect you show the flagships? Don't you know that temerity is not valor? Doubtful outcomes should make men bold, not rash." The captain wanted to respond, but for the moment the Admiral General could not hear his response, because he went to receive the viceroy, who was boarding the galley, along with some of his servants and several people from the city. "It was a fine chase, Senor Admiral General," said the viceroy. "Your Excellency will soon see how fine, when they are hanged from this lateen yard." "Why hanged?" replied the viceroy. "Because," responded the Admiral General, "contrary to the law and all the rights and customs of war, they have killed 2 of the best soldiers sailing on these galleys, and I have sworn to hang everyone I capture, and principally this boy, who is the captain of the brigantine." And he showed him the captain, with his hands tied and a noose around his neck, waiting for death. The viceroy looked at him, and saw him so handsome and so gallant and so humble that the boy's good looks provided him with an immediate letter of recommendation, and the viceroy felt a desire to pardon his death, and so he said, "Tell me, Captain, are you of Turkish nationality, or a Moor, or a renegade?" To which the boy responded, also in the Castilian tongue, "I am not of Turkish nationality, or a Moor, or a renegade." "Then what are you?" replied the viceroy. "A Christian woman." responded the young man. A woman and a Christian, in those clothes, in these circumstances, it is more to be wondered at than believed. Oh, signores, said the boy, suspend my execution for a little while. Not much will be lost if you delay your revenge while I recount to you my life. Everybody loves to say their life stories in this book. It's just so wild. Whose heart was so hard that these words would not soften it, at least enough to hear those that the sad and sorrowful boy wished to say. The Admiral General told him to say whatever he wished, but not to expect a pardon for his infamous crime. With this permission, the boy began to speak in this manner. I was born to Morisco parents, and am of that nation, more unhappy than wise, upon whom a sea of afflictions has lately poured down. In the current of their misfortunes, I was taken to Barbary by 2 of my uncles, and it did me no good to say that I was a Christian, as in fact I am, and not one of the false or apparent ones, but a true Catholic Christian. In vain did I tell the story to those responsible for our wretched banishment, and my uncles did not wish to believe it either. Instead, they considered it a lie, and an invitation that I had devised in order to remain in the land where I had been born, and so by force, rather than by will, they took me with them. I had a Christian mother and a wise Christian father. I drank in the Christian faith with my mother's milk. I was brought up with good morals. Neither in my speech nor in my behavior did I ever give a sign of being Morisca. Along with these virtues, which is what I think they are, grew whatever beauty I have, and although I lived in great modesty and seclusion, it could not have been enough because a young gentleman had the opportunity to see me. His name was Don Gaspar Gregorio, the oldest son of a gentleman whose village is next to ours. How he saw me, how we spoke, how he lost his heart to me, and I could not keep mine from him, would be a long story, especially now, when I fear that the merciless noose threatening me will tighten between my tongue and my throat. And so, I shall say only that Don Gaspar Gregorio wanted to accompany me into our exile. He mingled with the Moriscos who had come from other villages, for he knew the language very well, and on the journey he became friends with the 2 uncles who were taking with me. As soon as my prudent and far-sighted father heard the first proclamation of our banishment, he left our village to find a place in foreign kingdoms that would take us in. He left many pearls and precious stones, along with coins of gold and silver and gold doblones, buried and hidden in a place that I alone knew about. He told me that in the event we were banished before he returned, under no circumstances was I to touch the treasure he had left behind. I did as he told me, and with my uncles, as I have said, and other relatives and friends, we crossed to Barbary, and the place where we settled was Algiers, and it was as if we had settled in hell itself. The king heard of my beauty, and rumors of my wealth, and this was, in some ways, to my advantage. He summoned me, asked me what part of Spain I came from, and what money and jewels I had brought with me. I told him the name of our village, and said that my jewels and money were buried there, but could easily be recovered if I went back for them. I said this, yet feared he would be blinded not by my beauty, but by his own greed. While we were having this conversation, he was told that one of the most gallant and handsome young men imaginable had accompanied me. I realized immediately that they were speaking of Don Gaspar Gregorio, whose beauty far surpasses any other, no matter how praiseworthy. I was troubled when I considered the danger to him, because among those barbarous Turks, a handsome boy or youth is more highly esteemed than a woman, no matter how beautiful she may be." The king immediately ordered the young man be brought before him so that he could see him, and he asked me if what had been said about the boy was true. Then I, almost as if forewarned by heaven, said that it was. But I told him the boy wasn't a man, but a woman like me, and I begged him to let me dress her in her rightful clothes so that her beauty could be fully displayed, and she might appear before him without awkwardness. He told me I could leave and said we would talk the next day about how I could return to Spain and bring back the hidden treasure. I spoke to Don Gaspar. I told him of the danger he was in if he appeared as a man. I dressed him as a Moorish girl, and that same afternoon I brought him before the king, who, when he saw him, was stunned, and decided to keep her and make a present of her to his great lord, to avoid the danger she might face in his seraglio, and fearing that he himself might do, he ordered her placed in the home of some well-born Moorish women who would protect and serve her. Don Gaspar was taken there at once. With the two of us felt, for I cannot deny that I love him, I leave to the consideration of those who love and must part. Then the king devised a plan in which I would return to Spain on this brigantine, accompanied by 2 Turks, who were the ones who killed your soldiers. This Spanish renegade also came with me, and she pointed to the men who had first spoken. And I know very well that he is a secret Christian and has more desire to remain in Spain than to return to Barbary. The rest of the crew on the brigantine are Moors and Turks who serve only as oarmen. The 2 Turks, who are greedy and insolent, did not obey their orders, which were that as soon as we reached Spain, they were to put me and this renegade ashore in Christian clothes, which we have brought with us. Instead, they wanted to sail along this coast and take a prize, if they could, for they feared that if they put us ashore first, through unforeseen circumstances, we might reveal that the brigantine was at sea, and if there were galleys along this coast, their vessel would be captured. Last night we saw this coastline, and not knowing about the 4 galleys, we were discovered, and you have witnessed what has befallen us. In short, Don Gaspar Gregario remains dressed as a woman among women, in clear danger of being lost, and I find myself with my hands tired, waiting, or I should say fearing, to lose my life, which already wearies me. This is, señores, the end of my lamentable history, as true as it is unfortunate. What I beg of you is that you allow me to die as a Christian, for as I have said, in no way have I been guilty of the offense into which those of my nation have fallen. And then she fell silent, her eyes brimming with heartfelt tears that were accompanied by the many shed by those present. The viceroy, tender-hearted and compassionate, did not say a word, but went up to her, and with his own hands removed the rope that bound the beautiful hands of the Morisca. As the Christian Morisca was recounting her strange history, an ancient pilgrim who had boarded the galley with the viceroy had not taken his eyes off her, and as soon as she finished speaking, he threw himself at her feet and embraced them, and in words interrupted by 1,000 sobs and sighs, he said, "Oh, Alex Felix, my unfortunate daughter, I am your father, Quixote, who came back to find you because I cannot live without you, for you are my soul." Excuse me. Excuse me? What? It's so crazy how all these little stories that happen, the people that we meet, the places that we go, they tie up and are weaved into other people and other stories, and you get like different sides, and it's just so crazy. It's so crazy to me. Okay, let's keep going. At these words, Sancho opened his eyes and raised his head. He had lowered it, thinking about the evil that had befallen him, and looking at the pilgrim, he recognized the name Rocote, whom he had met on the day he left his governorship, and he confirmed that the girl was Rocote's daughter, for when she was untied she embraced her father, mixing her tears with his, and Rocote said to the Admiral General and the Viceroy, "Señores, this is my daughter, more unfortunate in what has happened to her than in her name." And there is a note right at the end of that sentence, and it says Felix, feliz, in contemporary Spanish, means happy or fortunate. She is called Ana Felix, and her surname is Ricote, and she is as famous for her beauty as she is for my wealth. I left my country to look in foreign lands for a place that would welcome and shelter us, and having found it in Germany, I came back dressed as a pilgrim, in the company of other Germans, to find my daughter and retrieve the great riches I left hidden here. I did not find my daughter, but I did find my treasure, which I have with me. And now, through the strange twist of fate that you have witnessed, I have found the treasure that enriches me most, which is my beloved daughter. If in the integrity of your justice our small guilt, and her tears and mine, can open the doors to mercy, then show us mercy, for we never thought of offending you, nor did we ever agree in any way with the intentions of our people, who have so justly been expelled. And Sancho said, "I know Ricote very well, and I know what he says about Ana Felix being his daughter is true. As for this other business of coming and going and having good and bad intentions, I have nothing to say about that." Everyone present was astonished at this strange matter, and the Admiral General said, "Drop by drop, your tears will not permit me to keep my vow. Live, beautiful Ana Felix, the years of life that heaven has granted you, and let the insolent and rash man who committed the crime bear the penalty." And then he ordered the 2 Turks who had killed his 2 soldiers, hung from the lateen yard. But the viceroy begged him very earnestly not to hang them, for theirs was more a crime of madness than of audacity. The Admiral General did as the viceroy requested, for revenge in cold blood is not easily carried out. Then they attempted to devise a plan to free Don Gaspar Gregorio from danger. To that end, Rocote offered the more than 2,000 ducados he had in pearls and precious stones. They thought of many schemes, but none was as good as the one proposed by the Spanish renegade we have mentioned, who offered to return to Algiers in a small vessel with some 6 rowers' benches, manned by Christian oarsmen, because he knew where, how, and when he could and should disembark, and by the same token he knew the house where Don Gaspar was being kept. The Admiral General and the Viceroy doubted if they could trust the renegade or be certain about the safety of the Christians who would man the oars, but Ana Felix vouched for him, and her father Ricote said he would pay the ransom for the Christians if they happened to be captured. Having decided, then, on this plan, the Viceroy disembarked, and Don Antonio Moreno took the Morisca and her father home with him, the Viceroy having charged him to welcome and treat them as hospitably as possible, and he himself offering whatever was in his house for their entertainment, for Ana Felix's beauty had inspired great benevolence and charity in his heart. And if I can turn the page, there we go. That is the end of chapter 63. Are you gonna sleep early tonight? Oh, it's only 1:40 a.m. Have a good one. It's always so good to see you. Okay, so this chapter, our merry band is walking around. They just came out of the printing press and they come across the docks and the galleys, and the galley is like called out because there's pirates coming. So they go out and they're just going to like capture or see what's going on, that sort of thing. And the other ship shoots and kills two of the sailors, two of the oarsmen, and the Admiral General is livid. Livid. And so he calls for the hanging of both the captain and the crew members. And the captain actually turns out to be a female who is trying to get back to Spain and find her wealth. And she tells her life story as everybody does in this book. And it turns out that she is the daughter of Ricote. Ricote is somebody that we met, that Sancho met on his way back to Don Quixote once he left his governorship. And so he and his family have been excommunicated, or not excommunicated, but shoved out of their country because of their beliefs. And so he has been trying to get back to his family and to find the wealth and all of those things so that they can be happy together, and he just hadn't found them. And here she is. Lo and behold, here she is coming back to look for the money and also her family. And they're reunited, and don't it feel good? And so after hearing this story, the Admiral General, and the Viceroy have decided not to kill this captain, not to kill this woman, Anna Felix, and instead just kill the two people who have killed the oarsmen because they were acting rashly. As it goes, as it goes. Hello, good to see you, Devil. Okay, here we go. Chapter 64, which deals with the adventure that caused Don Quixote more sorrows than any others that had befallen him so far. Oh, what could that be? I feel like he's had a lot of sorrows. Oh man, I don't even know. Okay, let's do this. Okay. The history recounts that the wife of Don Antonio Moreno was very pleased to see Ana Felix in her house. She welcomed her with great amiability, as charmed by her beauty as by her intelligence. For the Morisca was exceptionally endowed with both, and all the people in the city, as if summoned by the pealing bell, came to see her. Don Quixote told Don Antonio that the plan they had devised to free Don Gaspar Gregorio was not a good one, because it was more dangerous than feasible, and it would be better to put him ashore in Barbary with his arms and his horse, and he would set the young man free despite the entire host of Moors, just as Don Gaiferos had done for his wife, Melisendra. Your Grace should remember, said Sancho, when he heard this, that Senor Don Gaiferos rescued his wife on dry land and took her to France on dry land. But here, if we do release Don Gregorio, we have no way to bring him to Spain because there's an ocean in the middle. There is a remedy for everything except death, responded Don Quixote. For if we have a ship along the coast, we can embark on that, even if the whole world attempts to prevent it. Your Grace paints a very nice picture and makes it seem very easy, said Sancho. But there's many a slip tween cup and lip, and I'll depend on the renegade who looks to me like an honest and good-hearted man. An awesome nappy. Amazing. So good. Glad you're all rested. Don Antonio said that if the renegade failed in the enterprise, he would arrange for the great Don Quixote to go to Barbary. 2 days later, the renegade sailed in a light vessel with 6 oars on each side, manned by a very valiant crew of oarsmen, and 2 days after that the galleys departed for the Levant, the Admiral General first having asked the Viceroy to please keep him informed regarding the rescue of Don Gaspar Gregario, and the matter of Ana Felix and the Viceroy having agreed. Pepe, welcome in. Thank you so much for the follow. One morning, when Don Quixote went out to ride along the shore armed and in his armor because, as he often said, they were his adornment, and combat was his ease, and he was never without them, he saw a knight approaching in full armor, and on his shield was depicted a resplendent moon. And coming close enough to be heard, and addressing his words to Don Quixote, he cried out in a loud voice, saying, "Renowned knight, and never sufficiently praised Don Quixote of La Mancha, I am the knight of the White Moon, whose extraordinary deeds perhaps have come to your attention. I am here to do battle with you, and to test the strength of your mighty arms, obliging you to recognize and confess that my lady, whoever she may be, is incomparably more beautiful than your lady Dulcinea of Toboso, and if you confess this truth clearly and plainly, you will save yourself from death, and save me the trouble of killing you. And if you do battle, and I conquer you, I want no other satisfaction than that you abandon your arms, abstain from seeking adventures, and withdraw and retire to your home for a period of 1 year, where you must live without laying a hand on your sword, in peaceful tranquillity and profitable serenity. For such is required for the increase of your fortune and the salvation of your soul. And if you should conquer me, my life will be at your mercy, and my arms and horse will be yours as spoils, and the fame of my deeds will be added to yours. Consider what you should do, and respond immediately, for I have only this day to settle this matter." Full chores mode. Amazing. Get it. You just mowed the lawn, and on your last pass stepped in a hole and rolled your ankle. Oh no. Are you okay? Are you ice it? Ice it right now. It'll help with swelling. 20 minutes on, 20 minutes off. I'm so sorry. That's awful and terrible. I hope you're okay. Don Quixote was amazed and astonished, not only by the arrogance of the Knight of the White Moon, but by the cause for which he was challenging him, and with great calm and a severe bearing, he responded, "Knight of the White Moon, whose deeds have not yet come to my attention, I should dare to swear that you have never seen the illustrious Dulcinea, or if you had, I know you would not attempt to undertake this enterprise, because the sight of her would cause you to accept this truth. There never has been, nor can there ever be, a beauty that compares to her. And so, not saying that you lie, but not only that you are not correct in what you propound, I accept your challenge and the conditions you have mentioned, and I do so immediately, so that one day you have set aside does not slip away. But I do not accept the condition that your deeds be added to my fame, because I do not know what they are, or what kind they may be. I am content with mine, such as they are. Take, then, whichever part of the field you wish, and I shall do the same, and whomever God favors, may St. Peter bless." It doesn't hurt if you don't flex it. Okay, that's something. Honey Lemon, doing your part. Love it. People in the city who had seen the Knight of the White Moon told the viceroy that he was speaking with Don Quixote of the Mancha. The viceroy, believing it was probably a new adventure devised by Don Antonio Moreno or by some other gentleman of the city, immediately rode out to the shore with Don Antonio, accompanied by many other gentlemen, and they arrived just as Don Quixote was turning the reins of Rocinante in order to take the distance needed for his charge. Seeing that the two knights were showing signs of engaging in combat, the viceroy placed himself between them, asking what reason moved them to so unexpected a battle. The Knight of the White Moon responded that it was a question of precedence in beauty, and briefly repeated the same words he had said to Don Quixote, and stated that the conditions of the challenge had been accepted by both parties. The viceroy approached Don Antonio and asked him quietly if they knew the identity of the Knight of the White Moon, or if this was a trick they wanted to play on Don Quixote. Don Antonio responded that he did not know who the knight was, or if the challenge was in jest or in earnest. The viceroy was perplexed by this reply, for he did not know if he should allow them to continue with the battle. However, unable to persuade himself that it was anything but a joke, he moved aside, saying, "Señores, if the only remedy is to confess or die, and Señor Don Quixote is adamant, and the Knight of the White Moon is abdurant, then the matter is in the hands of God. Set to." The Knight of the White Moon thanked the viceroy with appropriate and courteous words for the permission he had granted them, and Don Quixote did the same, and commending himself with all his heart to heaven and to his Dulcinea, which was his custom at the beginning of the battles that presented themselves to him, he took a little more ground, because he saw that his adversary was doing the same, and without the playing of a trumpet, or any other martial instrument that would signal to them to charge, they both turned their horse at the same time, since the mount of the Knight of the White Moon was faster. He reached Don Quixote when he had gone 2/3 of the way, meeting his adversary with such power and force that without touching him, and with his lance, which he had raised, it seemed intentionally, he toppled both Rocinante and Don Quixote in a dangerous fall. He rushed at him immediately, and put his lance to Don Quixote's visor. He said, "You are vanquished, knight, and dead if you do not confess the conditions of our challenge." Don Quixote, battered and stunned, not raising his visor, and as if speaking from the tomb, said in a weak and feeble voice, "Dulcinea of Toboso is the most beautiful woman in the world, and I am the most unfortunate knight on earth. Wield your lance, knight, and take my life, for you have already taken my honor." "That I certainly shall not do," said the Knight of the White Moon. "Let the fame of Señora Dulcinea of Toboso's beauty live in its entirety. Let it live, I say. For the satisfaction I ask is that the great Don Quixote retire to his village for a year, or for as long as I shall determine, as we agreed before entering into this battle." And this was heard by the viceroy and Don Antonio, as well by many others who were present, and they also heard Don Quixote respond that as long as he asked without that was the detriment of Dulcinea, he would comply with all the rest like a true and honorable knight. With this confession, when this confession was made, the Knight of the White Moon turned his horse, bowed his head respectfully to the viceroy, and entered the city at the center. The viceroy ordered Don Antonio to go after him and learn without fail who he was. They picked up Don Quixote, uncovered his face, and found him pale and perspiring. Rocinante had been so badly hurt that he could not move. Sancho, utterly sad and utterly grief-stricken, did not know what to say or do. It seemed to him that the entire episode was a dream, and everything that had happened a matter of enchantment. He saw his master defeated and obliged to not take up arms for a year. He imagined the light of his glorious deeds dimmed, and the hopes of his latest promises to Sancho dissipated, as the wind dissipates smoke. He feared that Rocinante would be left crippled, and his master's bones dislocated, though it would be so fortunate if he had been made sane. And there is a note right at the end of that sentence, and it says, Cervantes creates a word play that cannot be duplicated in English, because of course he does. It is based on loco, crazy or mad, and the possibilities of dislocated, deslocado. Have a good dinner. See you later. Finally, the viceroy sent for a sedan chair, and Don Quixote was carried back to the city, and the viceroy returned as well, desiring to know the identity of the Knight of the White Moon who had left Don Quixote in so terrible a state. And that is the end of chapter 64. Okay, a short one, but a lot has happened. Excuse me as I snack on cheese. Okay, so in this one, we have the Knight of the White Moon, who has challenged Don Quixote and says, Lady Dulcinea is not the most beautiful woman in all of the world. You need to fight me, because this is what I'm saying. And if I win, you have to go back home to your village and not pick up arms for 1 year, or until I say otherwise. And of course, Don Quixote is like, dude, Lady Dulcinea is the most beautiful thing ever. Of course I'm gonna fight you. And so they go to fight. Don Quixote loses. He falls. Rocinante is injured. And the realization of what Don Quixote has agreed to is hitting Sancho. This is wild. It is such a dumb reason for a fight. You're absolutely right. She's not the most beautiful person. Yeah, she is. Let me fight you. So dumb. So dumb. Agreed. It's fine. And what high stakes, too. Be like, alright, you can believe that she's not the most beautiful. She is. I'm not gonna fight you because not being able to pick arms for a year is insane. What? And I'm assuming, which we all know what doing assumptions is, doing an assumption. But I'm assuming that the Knight of the White Moon is somebody that we've already met, and is somebody that the priest, the barber, and whoever else from Don Quixote's village, that they put him up to doing it so that Don Quixote will just go home. That's what I think is happening. So I guess we'll find out his identity. Let's see. Here we go. Here we go. Chapter 65, which reveals the identity of the Knight of the White Moon and recounts the release of Don Gaspar Gregorio, as well as other matters. Don Antonio Moreno followed the Knight of the White Moon, who was also followed, even pursued, by a good number of boys, until he entered an inn inside the city. Don Antonio went in as well, desiring to meet him. A squire came out to greet him and remove his armor. The knight withdrew to a room on the ground floor, and Don Antonio went after him, for he could barely wait to find out who he might be. The Knight of the White Moon, seeing that this gentleman would not leave him alone, said, I know very well, Signor, why you have come. You want to know who I am, and since there is no reason not to tell you, while my servant removes my armor, I shall tell you the truth of the matter, omitting nothing. Know then, Senor, that my name is Bachelor Sanson Carrasco. Oh, knew it. And it totally makes sense that it is him, because he has appeared before as the knight of the mirrors, I think, and has challenged Don Quixote before, but he lost last time. So it makes sense that it would be him. I am from the same village as Don Quixote of La Mancha, whose madness and foolishness move all of us who know him to pity. I have been one of those who pitied him most, and believing that his health depends on his remaining peacefully in his own village and in his own house, I devised a way to oblige him to do that. And so some 3 months ago, I took to the road as a knight-errant, calling myself the Knight of the Mirrors. Sometimes my memory's amazing, and sometimes it's that of a goldfish. And intending to do combat with him and defeat him without doing him harm, and setting as a condition of our combat that the vanquished would have to obey the victor. What I planned to ask him, because I already considered him defeated, was that he return to his village and not leave it again for a year, for in that time he could be cured. But fate ordained otherwise, because he defeated me and toppled me from my horse, and so my idea did not succeed. He continued on his way, and I returned home, defeated, chagrined, and bruised from my fall, which was a dangerous one. Yet not even this could diminish my desire to find him and defeat him, as you have witnessed today. And since he is so punctilious in complying with the rules of knight-errantry, he undoubtedly would comply with the conditions I have set and keep his word. This, Senor, is what has happened, and I have nothing more to tell you, and I implore you not to reveal my identity or tell Don Quixote who I am, so that my good intentions can be put into effect, and a man can regain his reason, for his is fine when free of the absurdities of chivalry. Oh, Senor, said Don Antonio, may God forgive you for the harm you have done to the entire world in wishing to restore the sanity of the most amusing madman in it. Don't you see, Senor, that the benefit caused by the sanity of Don Quixote cannot be as great as the pleasure produced by his madness? But I imagine that all the good bachelor's efforts will not suffice to restore sanity to a man so hopelessly mad, and if it was not contrary to charity, I would say that Don Quixote should never be cured, because when he regains his health, we lose not only his amusing words and actions, but those of his squire, Sancho Panza, any one of which would cheer melancholy itself. Even so, I shall be silent and tell him nothing, if only to see if I am correct in supposing that Senor Carrasco's endeavors will have no effect. The bachelor responded that the matter was well under way, and he expected a successful outcome. When Don Antonio offered to do whatever he might require, Sanson Carrasco took his leave, had his armor tied on to a mule, mounted the same horse he had ridden into battle, left the city that same day, and returned home without anything happening to him that needs to be recounted in this true history. Don Antonio told the viceroy everything Carrasco had told him, which did not give the viceroy much pleasure. Don Quixote's retirement meant that all who knew of his madness would lose the pleasure that might have been theirs. Don Quixote spent 6 days in bed, sick at heart, sad, melancholy, and morose as he went over and over again in this imagination the misfortune of his defeat. Sancho consoled him, and among other things he said, Señor, your grace should lift up your head and be glad, if you can, and give thanks to heaven that even though you were toppled to the ground, you didn't break any ribs. And since you know there are always wins and losses, excuse me, and you may have the hook, but not the bacon. Forget about the doctor because you don't need him to be the cured of what's ailing you. And let's go back home and stop going around looking for adventures in places and countries we don't know. If you think about it, I'm the one who's lost the most, though your grace has been hurt more. When I gave up the governorship, I gave up any desire to be a governor again, but I didn't give up wanting to be a count, which will never happen if your grace gives up on being a king by giving up the practice of your chivalry, which means all my hopes going up in smoke. Be quiet, Sancho, for my retirement and withdrawal do not need to last longer than a year, and then I shall return to my honorable practice, and there will be no lack of kingdoms for me to win and countships to give to you. My God, hear you. May God hear you, said Sancho, and sin be death, for I've always heard that virtuous hope is better than wicked possession. Just then Don Antonio came in and said, with indications of great joy, "Good news, Señor Don Quixote. Don Gaspar Gregorio and the renegade who went to rescue him are ashore." "What do I mean, ashore?" "They are already in the house of the viceroy and will be here at any moment." Don Quixote was cheered somewhat and said, "The truth is, I was about to say that I should be pleased if anything has turned out otherwise, because then I would be obliged to go to Barbary, where, by my strength of arms, I would free not only Don Gaspar Gregorio, but all the Christian captives in Barbary. But what I am saying, wretch that I am I not the vanquished one? Am I not the defeated one? Am I not the one who cannot take arms for a year? Then what am I promising? Why do I praise myself when it would be more appropriate for me to use a distaff and not a word?" "Enough of that, señor," said Sancho. "Long live the hen, even with the pip. Today it's your turn and tomorrow it's mine. These matters of clashes and blows couldn't be taken too seriously, because the man who falls today can pick himself up tomorrow, unless he decides to stay in bed. I mean, if he lets himself lose heart and doesn't find a new spirit of new fights. And your grace should get up now to receive Don Gaspar Gregorio, because it seems to me that everybody's in an uproar, and he must be in the house by now." And this was true, because Don Gaspar Gregorio and the renegade had already given an account to the viceroy of the journey there and back. And since Don Gaspar Gregorio was longing to see Ana Felix, he came with the renegade to the house of Don Antonio. Although he had been dressed in women's clothes when they took him out of Algiers on the boat, he had exchanged them for the clothes of a captive who had been rescued along with him. But no matter what he wore, he would have been sought after, served, and esteemed because he was extraordinarily handsome, and his age, apparently, was 17 or 18 years old. Quixote and his daughter came out to receive him, the father with tears in his eyes, and the daughter with modesty. They did not embrace each other, because where there is great love, generally, there is not excessive boldness. The beauty of Don Gaspar Gregorio and Ana Felix, seen together, astounded everyone present. Silence spoke for the two lovers, and their eyes were the tongues that revealed their chaste and joyful thoughts. The renegade recounted the ingenious means he had used to rescue Don Gaspar Gregorio. Don Gaspar Gregorio recounted the dangers and difficulties he had undergone with women in whose house he had been living, not at length, but in a few words, showing that he had intelligence far beyond his years. In the end, Quixote paid and liberally compensated the renegade as well as the oarsman. The renegade was reconciled and, with reintegrated into the church, a rotting limb who became cleansed and healthy again through the penance and repentance. 2 days later, the viceroy discussed with Don Antonio what means to employ so that Ana Felix and her father could stay in Spain, for it seemed to them there was no good reason that so Christian a daughter and, apparently, so well-intentioned a father should not remain. Don Antonio offered to go to court to negotiate the matter, for he had to go there in any event to attend to other affairs, letting it be known that by means of favors and gifts many difficult issues can be resolved. One must not place hope, said Ricote, who was present at this conversation, in favors or gifts, because with the great Don Bernardino de Velasco, Count of Salazar, whom his Majesty made responsible for our expulsion, prayers are in vain, as are promises, gifts, and lamentations, for although it is true that he mixes mercy with justice, he sees that the entire body of our nation is contaminated and rotten, and he burns it with a cautery rather than soothing it with an ointment. And so, with prudence, sagacity, diligence, and the fear he imposes, he has borne on his strong shoulders the weight of this great plan and put it into effect. And our schemes, strategies, pleas, and deceptions have not been able to blind his eyes of Argus, which are always alert, so that none of our people can stay behind or be concealed. Like a hidden root that in times to come will send out shoots and bear poison fruits in Spain, which is clean now and rid of the fears caused by our numbers. And there is a note all the way back at the beginning of this long sentence, and it is right after Don Bernardino de Velasco, Count of Salazar, and it says, he was in charge of the expulsion of the Moriscos from Castilla. I feel like that could have been inferred, but thank you, footnote. What a heroic decision by the great Felipe III, and what unparalleled wisdom to have entrusted its execution to Don Bernardino de Velasco. And we have another note right after Felipe III, and it says, Felipe III, 1578 to 1621, became king in 1598 and ruled until his death. When I am there at court, I shall undertake all possible measures, one by one, and may heaven's will be done, said Don Antonio. Don Gaspar Gregorio will come with me and alleviate the sorrows his parents must feel on account of his absence. Ana Felix will stay with my wife in my house or in a convent, and I know the viceroy would like the good Ricote to stay with him until we see the outcome of my negotiations. The viceroy consented to everything that was proposed, but Don Gaspar Gregorio, when he learned their plans, said that under no circumstances could he or would he leave Doña Ana Felix. But because he intended to see his parents and then arranged to come back for her, he finally agreed. Ana Felix stayed with Don Antonio's wife, and Ricote stayed with the viceroy. The day of Don Antonio's departure arrived, and 2 days later that of Don Quixote and Sancho, for his fall did not allow him to set out any sooner. There were tears, sighs, swoons, and sobs when Don Gaspar Gregorio took his leave of Ana Felix. Ricote offered him 1,000 escudos if he wanted them, but he would not take any, though he did borrow 5 escudos from Don Antonio, promising to repay them at court. With this, they left, and subsequently Don Quixote and Sancho departed, as has been said, Don Quixote unarmed and in traveling clothes, and Sancho on foot, since the gray was carrying the armor. End of chapter 65. All right. Grab a little snack, a little cheese snack. So, in this chapter, Don Quixote has fully accepted that he has lost, and he's fully accepted that he already agreed to the terms of the battle, and so he will not be taking up arms for 1 year, which is wild. And a little sad. I do understand why he is so, beaten down by this. because he's getting such joy from traveling around and being a knight errant and just getting into all of these adventures, even if, he has to only eat acorns for days at a time, or, gets thrown from his horse a couple times. Like, he is loving it so much. And then for that to be taken away is sad. And there are so many times when throughout the book we're reading this, yeah, or even if Sancho suffers, it's fine. There are so many times in this book when we do get glimmers of Don Quixote's intelligence in all of these different matters that don't necessarily have to do with chivalry. Um, and we get small glimpses behind like the facade of him being a knight errant, like him knowing that it is, not real every once in a while, very infrequently, but it has happened where he's like, yeah, but isn't it better to live with imagination instead of just staying at home? Things like that. So it is an end of an era, and it definitely feels like that too. I'm poor Sancho. But I love that Sancho's like, well, I'm the one who's losing the most. I was a governor, man. I'm never going to be a governor again if we just go home. But Don Quixote almost like promises Sancho and is like, it's just for a year. I've only agreed to doing this for a year. So we'll see. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. As I slowly eat my cheese snack. Wink, wink. Yeah, exactly. I'm going to stay home for a year and not pull up, touch arms, draw arms. No arms will be had. Uh-huh. Okay. All right. Here we go. Let's see how long this chapter is. We have 48 pages left. We will not finish tonight. I can guarantee that. It definitely takes me longer than a minute to read a page. The font in this book is just so small. It's so small. And then the footnotes are half of that size. So my little eyeballs are just they're working. They're working. See, they didn't say a year on which planet. We ride off in 88 days, Sancho. Quick! Exactly. Alright. Chapter 66. Oh, I was gonna look to see how many pages. I lied. 1, 2, 3. Oh, it's a pretty short one. There's only 5 pages. We'll definitely finish this chapter. How long is the next one? Okay, that one's also short. Okay, cool. Let's do it. Let's read 2 chapters. Chapter 66, which recounts what will be seen by whoever reads it, or heard by whoever listens to it being read. Oh my god, that's you guys. You're the ones who are listening to it being read. That's fun. As he left Barcelona, Don Quixote turned to look at the place where he had fallen. You're part of the story, exactly. Saying, here was Troy. Here my misfortune, not my cowardice, did away with the glories I have achieved. Here fortune turned her changes and reverses against me. Here my deeds were obscured. Here, in short, my happiness fell, never to rise again. Dramatic. When Sancho heard this, he said, Señor, it is as fitting for valiant hearts to endure misfortune as it is for them to rejoice in prosperity, and I judge this on the basis of my own experience. For if I was happy when I was governor, now that I'm a squire on foot, I'm not sad, because I've heard that the woman they call for fortune is drunken and fickle, and most of all blind. So she doesn't see what she's doing and doesn't know who she's throwing down or raising up. You sound very philosophical. Excuse me. You sound very philosophical, Sancho, responded Don Quixote, and you speak very wisely. I do not know who taught that to you. What I can say is that there is no fortune in the world, and the things that happen in it, whether good or bad, do not happen by chance, but by particular providence of heaven, which is why people say that each man is the architect of his own fortune. I have done that with mine, but without the necessary prudence, and so my assumptions have turned out badly, for I should have realized that Rocinante's weakness could not resist the power and size of the horse belonging to the Knight of the White Moon. In short, I took a risk, I did what I could, I was toppled, and although I lost my honor, I did not lose, nor can I lose, the virtue of keeping my word. When I was a knight-errant, daring and brave, my axe and my hands brought credit to my deeds, and now, when I am an ordinary gentleman, I shall bring credit to my words by keeping the promise I made. Walk on, then, Sancho, my friend, and let us go home to spend the year of our novitiate, and in that seclusion we shall gather new strength to return to the practice of arms, which will never be forgotten by me. Señor, responded Sancho, traveling on foot is not so pleasant a thing that it leads or moves me to travel a great distance each day. Let's leave this armor hanging from some trees instead of a hanged man, and if I can sit on my gray, with my feet off the ground, we'll travel whatever distance your grace asks for and decides, but if you think I'll walk a greater distance on foot, you'd better think again. You have spoken well, Sancho, responded Don Quixote. Let my armor be hung as a trophy, and beneath it, or all around it, we shall carve on the trees that was written on the trophy of Roland's arms. Let no one move them who cannot test his own against Roland. There's a note right after those two lines, and it says, these lines by Aristotle are also cited in chapter 8 of the first part. What a deep cut. What a callback, man. I can't remember that. Thank you, footnote. That all seems like pearls to me, responded Sancho. And if we weren't going to need Rocinante on the road, it would be a good idea to leave him hanging too. Well, replied Don Quixote, I do not want either him or my arms hanged, so that no one can say this is a bad reward for good service. Your grace is right, responded Sancho, because according to wise men you shouldn't blame the paddle sack for the donkey's mistake, and since your grace is to blame for what happened, you should punish yourself and not turn your anger against your battered and bloody arms, or the gentle Rocinante, or my tender feet, by wanting them to walk more than is fair. They spent all that day in this kind of talk and conversation, and another 4 as well, and nothing happened to interfere with their journey. But on the 5th day, at the entrance to a village, they discovered a crowd of people at the door of an inn, for it was a holiday, and they were there enjoying themselves. When Don Quixote reached them, a peasant raised his voice, saying, one of these two gentlemen, who don't know the party, can decide our wager. Darby, thank you so much for the follow. Welcome in. Hi. I shall certainly, responded Don Quixote, and with complete rectitude, if I can understand it. Well then, señor, said the peasant, the fact is that a man from this village, so fat he weighs 11 arrobas, challenged a neighbor of his, who doesn't weigh more than 5, to a race. The condition was that they had to run 100 paces carrying equal weight, And when the challenger was asked how they would equal the weight, he said that the other man who weighs 5 arrobas should add another 6 arrobas of iron to his back, and in this way the thin man's 11 arrobas would match the 11 of the fat man. Hey, oh my gosh, yes. It is massive book. Yeah. And there are editions where you can just get the first part or just the second part, but yeah, this bad boy has both parts. Yes, the fight against the windmill, that's a classic one. That one's so good. Oh no, said Sancho before Don Quixote could respond. Just a few days ago I stopped being a governor, and it's up to the judge, as everybody knows, to decide questions and give an opinion in every case. You are welcome to respond, said Don Quixote. Sancho, my friend, I would not be competent to do so. My judgment is so shaken and confused. With this permission, Sancho said to the peasants who stood around him with their mouths open and waiting for his verdict. Brothers, what the fat man asks for is not fair and doesn't have a shred of justice in it, because what they say is true, and the one who's challenged can choose his weapons. It isn't right for him to choose ones that would keep him or stop him from being victorious, and so it's my opinion that the fat challenger should prune, trim, peel away, scrape, pare off, and lose 6 arrobas of his flesh, here and there on his body, wherever he thinks best. And in this way, when he weighs 5 arrobas, he'll match and be equal to the 5 of his adversary, and so they'll be able to run, carrying equal weight. And there is a note right here, and it says, this story is taken from the Floresta General Anthology by Melchor de Santa Cruz, a 16th century student and collector of proverbs. Buddy, you missed that part. Why? By my soul, said a peasant who had listened to Sancho's decision, this gentleman has spoken like a saint, and given a verdict like a canon. But I'll bet the fat man won't want to lose an ounce of his flesh, let alone 6 arrobas of it. The best thing would be if they don't run, responded another, because then the thin man won't be worn out carrying that weight, and the fat man won't have to lose any. Let half the wager be in wine, and let's take these gentlemen to the tavern that has a good wine, and let it be on me, and wear a cape when it rains. Señores, responded Don Quixote, I thank you, but I cannot stop even for a moment. Melancholy thoughts and events make me seem discourteous and oblige me to travel quickly. And so, spurring Rocinante, he rode forward, leaving them all amazed at having seen and observed both his strange figure and the intelligence of his servant, for that is what they judged Sancho to be. And another of the peasants said, if the servant is this intelligent, what must the master be like? I'll bet if they went to study in Salamanca, in the wink of an eye they'd be magistrates. Everything's deceit except studying and more studying, and having favor and good luck. When a man least expects it, he finds himself with a staff in his hand or a meter on his head. Do they have laxatives? That'll help him lose weight real quick. Master and servant spent that night in the middle of a field in the open air. The next day, as they continued their journey, they saw a man walking toward them, with saddlebags around their neck and a pike or javelin in his hand, looking exactly like a courier on foot as he approached Don Quixote. He quickened his pace until he was almost running, and he came up to him and embraced his right thigh, which was as high as he could reach, and said with the display of great joy, "Oh, Señor Don Quixote of La Mancha, what happiness will fill the heart of my lord the Duke when he knows that your grace is returning to his castle, for he is still there with my lady the Duchess." "I do not recognize you, friend," said Don Quixote, "and I shall not know who you are if you do not tell me." I, Señor Don Quixote, said the courier, am Toselos, the footman of my lord the duke, who refused to fight with your grace over marrying the daughter of Doña Rodriguez. God save me, said Don Quixote. Is it possible that you are the one whom the enchanters, my enemies, transformed into the footman you mention in order to cheat me of the honor of that combat? Be quiet, señor, replied the letter carrier. There is no enchantment at all, and no change in anybody's face. I entered the field as much Toselos, the footman, as I was when I left it. I wanted to marry without fighting, because I liked the girl's looks, but things turned out just the opposite of my intention, because as soon as your grace left our castle, my lord the duke had me lashed 100 times for going against the orders he had given me before I went into combat, and the upshot is that the girl is a nun, and Doña Rodriguez has gone back to Castilla, and I'm going now to Barcelona to bring a packet of letters to the viceroy that my master has sent me. If your grace would like a drink that's pure, though warm, I have a gourd filled with good wine, and a few slices of trenchon cheese that will call upon and wake your thirst if it happens to be sleeping. I'll see this bet, said Sancho, and stake it all on courtesy, and let good Tosilos pour in spite of and despite all the enchanters in the Indies. Well, well, said Don Quixote, you are, Sancho, the greatest glutton in the world, and the most ignorant man on earth, for you cannot be persuaded that this courier is enchanted and this Tisilos a counterfeit. Stay with him and drink your fill, and I shall go ahead slowly and wait for you until you come. The footman laughed, uncovered his gourd, and took his cheese and a small loaf of bread out of the saddle-bag, and he and Sancho sat on the green grass, and in companionable peace quickly dispatched and finished the contents of the saddle-bags with so much spirit that they licked the packet of the letters simply because it smelled of cheese. That's weird. Licking a letter packet because it just smells like cheese. Tosilos said to Sancho, "There's no doubt that your master, Sancho, my friend, must be a madman." "What do you mean, must be?" responded Sancho. "He doesn't know anybody anything. He pays for everything and more when madness is the coin." There's a note here. Right after he doesn't owe anybody anything, and it says, the untranslatable wordplay, here we go, is based on the verb deber, which is the equivalent of must as well as owe. I'm so happy that we have these footnotes because there have been many things that just don't translate quite the same way. So the humor is a bit lost when in English versus when in Spanish. So that's great. Thank you, footnotes, once again. I see it clearly, and I tell him so clearly, but what good does it do? Especially now when he's really hopeless because he was defeated by the Knight of the White Moon. Tosilos begged him to tell him what had happened, but Sancho responded that it was discourteous to allow his master to wait for him, and on another day, if they were to meet, there would be time for that. And having stood after he had shaken his tunic and brushed the crumbs from his beard, he walked behind the grey, said goodbye, left Tosilos, and overtook his master, who was waiting for him in the shade of a tree. And that is the end of chapter 66. Another short one, and this next one is also short. Yeah. Huh. Sometimes you wonder how many English yes translate when they yes. That's true. That's true. I do, because there's just so many puns and like so many like turns of phrases and just like sayings. And I do wonder if like when like English is translated to other languages, like if it's if there are like other sayings that are close to it, like it's raining cats and dogs out, or like puns, which I guess would be harder to translate, but for phrases, I'm wondering if there are similar ones or if they do need footnotes that are like, this doesn't make sense in whatever language, but this is what they're trying to say. These are the thoughts that keep me up at night. All right. Chapter 67. Oh, wait. Just kidding. I want some water. Okay. Now, chapter 67. Regarding the decision Don Quixote made to become a shepherd and lead a pastoral life until the year of his promise had passed, along with other incidents that are truly pleasurable and entertaining. Get your dinner. Get it. If many thoughts had troubled Don Quixote before his fall, many more troubled him after he was toppled. As has been said, he was in the shade of the tree, and there, like flies swarming around honey, thoughts came to him and stung him. Some had to do with the disenchantments of Dulcinea, and others with the life he would have to live in his forced retirement. Then Sancho arrived and praised the liberality of the footman, Ocillos. "Is it possible," said Don Quixote, "O Sancho, that you still think he is a real footman? It seems you have forgotten that you saw Dulcinea changed and transformed into the peasant, and the knight of the mirrors into bachelor Carrasco, the work, in both cases, of the enchanters who pursue me. But tell me now, did you ask the man you call Tosilos, what God has done with Altisidora? Did she weep over my absence, or has she already placed on the hands of oblivion the amorous thoughts that so troubled her in my presence?" That's right. Altisidora is one of the maidens of the Duke and Duchess who just fell madly in love with Don Quixote. And it's just interesting because she was not let in on the joke of like the Duke and Duchess were like telling everybody to like treat him a certain way, and they did not tell her. This is just she just falling in love all on her own, not an act, completely real. And she was singing songs outside of his window. "Mine were not the kind," responded Sancho, "that would let me ask about nonsense. But by God, señor, is your grace interested now in asking about other people's thoughts, especially amorous ones?" "Look, Sancho," said Don Quixote, "there is a great difference between the actions one takes because of love and those taken because of gratitude. A knight may well be unenamored, but strictly speaking, he can never be ungrateful. Altisidora, it seems, loved me dearly. She gave me the 3 nightcaps, which you know about. She wept at my departure. She cursed me. She rivaled me. She complained, despite all modesty, publicly. All of these were signs that she adored me, for the anger of lovers often ends in curses. I had no hopes to offer her, or treasures to present to her, because all of mine I had given to Dulcinea, and the treasures of knights-errant are, like those of goblins, apparent and false, and I can give her only the innocent memories I have of her. As for those I have of Dulcinea, you offend her with your slackness in administering the lashes and in punishing that flesh. May I see it devoured by wolves, which you would rather preserve for the worms than use for the relief of that poor lady." And there is a note after, "like those of goblins, apparent and false," and it says, "It was believed that goblins turned buried treasure into coal, which is the origin of the phrase tesoro de duende, goblin's treasure, to describe wealth that is squandered." Interesting. All of this lore. I love it. "Señor," responded Sancho, "if you want to know the truth, I am not convinced that lashing my backside has anything to do with the disenchantment. with disenchanting the Let's try that again. If you want to know the truth, I'm not convinced that lashing my backside has anything to do with the disenchanting the enchanted, because it would be like saying if you have a headache, put some ointment on your knees. I'd swear, at least, that in all the histories about knight-errantry that your grace has read, you've never seen a disenchantment by flogging. But whether that's true or not, I'll give myself the lashings when I feel like it, and it's a convenient time for me to punish myself. May it be God's will, responded Don Quixote, and may the heavens grant you the grace to realize the obligation you have to help my lady, who is yours as well, since you are my servant. They were conversing as they continued on their way, until they reached the same point and spot where they had been trampled by the bulls. Don Quixote recognized it, and said to Sancho, "This is the meadow where we encountered the beautiful shepherdesses and gallant shepherds who wanted to restore and imitate pastoral Arcadia here, a thought as original as it is intelligent, and like them, if you think it is a good idea, I should like, O Sancho, for us to become shepherds. At least for the time I must retire. I shall buy some sheep and all other things needed for the pastoral exercise, and my name will be Shepherd Quixotes, and yours Shepherd Pancino, and we shall roam the mountains, the woods, and the meadows, singing here, lamenting there, drinking the liquid crystal of the fountains, or the limpid streams, or the rushing rivers. With a copious hand the oaks will give us their sweetest fruit, the hard cork trees, their trunks as seats, the willows their shade, the roses their fragrance, the broad meadows, carpets of 1,000 shades and colors, the clear, pure air our breath, the moon and stars our light in spite of night's darkness. The pleasure will give us our songs, joy our weeping, Apollo our verses, love our conceits, and with these we shall make ourselves eternal and famous, not only in the present, but in times to come." And we have a note right there, right where we left off, and it says, Martin de Ricoeur points out that despite this essentially satiric depiction of the pastoral novel, Cervantes was very pleased with his pastoral Galatea, and was working on its second part at approximately the same time that he wrote this passage. "By God," said Sancho, "that sort of life squares so well with me, it even corners. Besides, as soon as Bachelor Sanson Carrasco and the barber Master Nicholas see it, they'll want to lead that life and become shepherds along with us. God willing, the priest will decide to join the fold, too. He's so good-natured and fond of enjoying himself." "You have spoken very well," said Don Quixote, "and Bachelor Carrasco Sanson, if he enters the pastoral fraternity, as he undoubtedly will, can call himself Shepherd Sansonino, there we go, or even Shepherd Carrascon. Barber Nicolas can be Miculoso, as old Boscan was called Nemoroso. I do not know what name we could give the priest, unless it was one derived from his profession, and we call him Shepherd Coriambro." Okay. We have 3 notes in that sentence, so we'll go through them one by one. The first one is after Barber Nicolas can be Miculoso, and it says this name is based on a pastoral version of Miculas for Nicolas. The next note is after Nemoroso. So, as Old Boscan was called Nemoroso, and it says, "At one time it was thought that Nemoroso in Garcilaso's first eclogue was the poet's friend and fellow poet Boscan, a name related to bosque, or forest. Nemus has the same meaning in Latin." And then our last note is after Shepherd Coriambro, and it says the Spanish word for priest that is used here is cura. There you go. "As for the shepherdesses, whose lovers we shall be, we can choose their names as if we were picking pears, and since my lady's fits a shepherdess as well as a princess. There is no reason for me to try to find another that would be more suitable. You, Sancho, can call yours whatever you like." "I don't plan," responded Sancho, "to give her any name but Teresona, which will suit her plumpness, and the name she already has, which is Teresa. Besides, I'll celebrate her in my verses and reveal my chaste desires, for I don't plan to go looking for trouble in other men's houses." And there is a note after Teresona, which will suit her plumpness, and it says ona is an augmentative ending, so that Teresona is roughly equivalent to Big Teresa. Such a complimentary name. Good job, Sancho. It won't be good for the priest to have a shepherdess, because he ought to set a good example. But if the bachelor wants to have one, his soul is his own business. I cannot. To have your partner basically keep your name, but just add big to it. I'm changing your name to reflect your plumpness. Not sorry. Moog Ona has a nice ring to it. Oh my gosh. "God save me," said Don Quixote. "What a life we shall lead, Sancho, my friend! What flageolets will reach our ears, what Zamorin pipes, what timbrels, what tambourines, and what rebecks! Well, and what if in the midst of all this music albox should resound? Then we would have all the pastoral instruments." "What are albox?" asked Sancho. "I've never heard of them or seen them in my life." "Albox," responded Don Quixote, "are something like brass candlesticks, and when you hit one with the other along the empty or hollow side, it makes a sound that is not unpleasant, though it may not be very beautiful or harmonious, and it goes well with the rustic nature of pipes and timbrels. The word albox is Moorish, as are all of the other Castilian tongue that begin with al, for example, almohaza, almorzar, alhombra, alguacil, alhuema, almacen, alcancia, and other similar words. Our language has only three that are Moorish and end in the letter I, and they are, oh my gosh, Barsegui, Zakizami, and Maravedi. And we have two notes in that. The first one is after alcancia, and it says the words mean currycomb, to eat lunch, carpet, bailiff, lavender, storehouse, money box. Despite the general correctness of this oddly placed lesson in etymology, Martin de Ricoeur points out that Cervantes is not entirely accurate in the examples he chooses, although he agrees generally with the linguists of his day. Wild. And then the second one is after Maravedi, and it says the words mean Moorish half-boot, hovel, ancient Spanish coin. Ahali and al-Faqih, as much as the initial al as for the I, are known to be Arabic. And there is a note after al-Faqih, and it says the words mean gillyflower, teacher of the Quran. I have told you this in passing because it came to mind when I happened to mention albicus. One thing that will keep us a great deal to achieve perfection in this endeavor is that I am something of a poet, as you know, and Bachelor Sanson Carrasco is even better. I say nothing about the priest, but I would wager that he has a touch of the poet, and Master Nicholas as well. I have no doubt about that, because all barbers, or most of them, are guitarists and rhymers. Why did I feel the need to just make up a word? Rhythmers. It definitely says rhymers. Whoopsie. I shall complain of absence. You will praise yourself as a steadfast lover. Shepherd Carrascon will lament being scorned. The priest Curiambro, whatever he chooses. And so things will go on so well that no one could ask for more. Oh, thank you so much. What can I say? I'm great at coming up with words that don't exist, but sound like they should. Or at least sound interesting. To which Sancho responded, I am, senor, so fortunate that I hate the day will never come when I can join this exercise. Oh, how polished I'll keep the spoons when I'm a shepherd. What soft bread, what cream, what garlands, what pastoral odds and ends that, if they don't earn me fame as a wise man, can't help but earn me fame as a clever one. Sanchica, my daughter, will bring food up from our flocks. But wait, she's a good-looking girl, and there are shepherds more wicked than simple, and I wouldn't want her to go for wool and come back shorn. Love and unchaste desires are as likely in the countryside as in the cities, in shepherds' huts as in royal palaces. And if you take away the cause, you take away the sin. And if your eyes don't see, your heart doesn't break. And a jump over the thicket is better than the prayers of good men. Percussionist is far too long, and rhythmers is obviously better. Thank you for that support. I appreciate it. No more proverbs, Sancho, said Don Quixote. For any one of those you have said is enough to explain your thoughts. I have often advised you not to be so prodigal in your proverbs and to restrain yourself from saying them. But it seems that it is like preaching in the desert, and my mother punishes me, and I deceive her. It seems to me, responded Sancho, that your grace is like the pot calling the kettle black. You reprove me for saying proverbs, and your grace strings them together two at a time. Look, Sancho, responded Don Quixote, I say proverbs when they are appropriate, and when I say them they fit like the rings on your fingers. But you drag them in by the hair and pull them along and do not guide them. And if I remember correctly, I have already told you that proverbs are brief maxims derived from the experience and speculation of wise men in the past. And if the proverb is not to the point, it is not a maxim, it is nonsense. But let us leave this for now, and since night is approaching, let us withdraw some distance from the king's highway and spend the night there, and God alone knows what tomorrow will bring. They withdrew and had a scant late supper, much against the will of Sancho, to whom it seemed that the austerities of knight-errantry were common in the forests and mountains, while abundance was displaced in castles and houses, as much in the house of Don Diego de Miranda or Don Antonio Moreno as at the wedding of the wealthy Camacho. But he considered that it would not always be day, and it would not always be night, and so he spent that night sleeping, while his master kept watch. And that is the end of chapter 67. Okay, so what happened? We got an etymology lesson, which is great. um, oh, and they decided that they're gonna be shepherds and they're gonna change their names and just have new identities now as if they were in Wipro, which is great. Love to see that. Oh my gosh, 3 a.m. That's insane. Go to sleep. Go to sleep. Please. So, yes. I'm excited. Can we picture Don Quixote and Sancho Panza as shepherds? I feel like that might be too boring for them. Although, knowing them, they will definitely make it not boring. You know what I mean? It'll definitely be crazy. And we'll still have insane misfortunes and misadventures. Exactly. They'll make a game of it. It will not be boring. I don't know why I even said that it would be boring. Because it absolutely would not. Okay. Wow. That is going to be the end of tonight. We have 38 pages to read. We will absolutely be finishing next time. Absatutums be finishing next time. Oh, this is so exciting. I know. We'll be finishing. Have I prepared the next book? Absolutely not. No idea what we're going to read. Of course, I have like a long list and a short list. I just, I'm not prepared, but that's okay. You're not here because I'm prepared. And if you are, I have fooled you all. Mwah. But yeah, that's gonna be it for today. We will definitely be finishing next week. Yeah. Yes, of course. Of course, the Don Coyote watch party while I prepare for the next book. It only makes sense. Oh, I'm so excited. I'm so excited to finish this and see how everything is wrapped up. I have a good feeling. I have a good feeling. I don't think it'll be like lame. Although now that I said that, did I just manifest it? I don't know. I don't know. Oh my gosh. Please do all the things. Do all the things. Do all the chores. I'm glad that you were productive. Yeah, of course. Anytime. I'm so glad that you guys come and hang out with me. I hope you all have a great evening, whether it's 3 a.m. or 7 p.m. or whatever time it is where you are. And I hope to see you very, very soon. As always, whether you lurk, whether you chat, I 1000% appreciate you, and I 1000% appreciate your support. Thank you so, so much for letting me do what I do. I will see you all very soon.